On the evening of April 14th, the Titanic is cruising through the North Atlantic, about 2.5 days away from New York.
The sea was completely calm like a mirror. The stars were setting right down to the horizon. In fact, some of the passengers said that they could see the stars reflected on the surface of the water.
Then, just before 11:40 p.m., something ominous emerges from the dark.
Titanic's lookouts are staring ahead at the calm ocean. And then they notice a dark object coming out of the haze in front of them. And they ring the bell 3 times to indicate to the bridge there's an object dead ahead. In charge of Titanic that night is First Officer Murdoch. He is the first officer on the bridge, also staring ahead with his binoculars. As soon as they hear the warning of the bells, Murdoch gives the order, harder starboard, to turn the ship to the left-hand side. And immediately, Titanic slowly starts to turn.
And then, just 37 seconds after the iceberg is first spotted, Titanic makes contact.
She misses the berg that she can see above the surface, but unfortunately, a spur of the berg under the water scrapes along Titanic's hull. The impact of the iceberg is in fact so slight that most passengers sleep through it, and some who are already awake just regard it as a small bump.
But it's much more than a small bump.
Immediately, Murdoch knows he had hit an iceberg. He orders the watertight compartments to be sealed and the watertight doors to be lowered.
But the water continues to pour into the ship, and 5 minutes later, Titanic's engines shut down.
At about 2:18 a.m., the front of the ship, because it's full of so much water, is dipping in underneath the surface. The pressure of all the water from the front, mixed with the weight of the propellers in the back, causes the ship to snap in half.
After Titanic breaks in half, her stern comes right up into almost vertical position and then slowly slips beneath the waves. On the surface, there is panic. There are lifeboats rowing away from the scene to avoid suction. And now there are 1,500 people in the water in the darkness.
Rescue ship Carpathia reaches Titanic's coordinates at 3:30 a.m., only to miss the sinking ship by a little more than an hour. They rescue 706 survivors from the lifeboats. 2/3 of Titanic's passengers and crew are gone. News of the sinking makes headlines around the world.
There's no doubt that the ship struck an iceberg. What everyone wants to know is how this seemingly unsinkable ship could suddenly sink.
Titanic's construction starts in 1909, and its design specifically had safety features that were new and innovative for the time period, which really led to the media calling her unsinkable.
Titanic's builders and her owner boast on the maiden voyage that Titanic can be sliced crosswise into 3 separate pieces, and each individual piece will float.
Part of the design of the Titanic was to allow it to be a massive lifeboat. In the event that damage occurred, they could shut the 4 compartments, or however many compartments had been punctured, and eventually the passengers could be rescued within that time.
However, historians contend that there was one small mistake with the design of the ship.
Titanic is a massive 800-foot-plus long ship separated by steel walls known as bulkheads. Those walls separated the watertight compartments in the ship, of which there were 16. Close to double the number of watertight compartments or compartments that you'd see in your typical ship.
If you've ever walked through a submarine, you have a door that you have to hunker down and walk through, and then they can close that door. That's a bulkhead, the same type of bulkhead that was on Titanic.
The bulkhead has 2 purposes. One, to contain any water that might make it into the ship in case of a puncture, and to actually strengthen the hull.
It's engineered such that if the ship were to be hit in one of those watertight compartments, they could close the doors on either side of it, and only that compartment will fill with water. Worst case scenario, if it hits on a bulkhead wall, it would fill 2 watertight compartments. Titanic is so special that if any of the first 4 watertight compartments, or all 4, are compromised, the ship would still float.
But there's one critical weakness in the design.
Titanic's watertight bulkheads were not carried all the way up, and they were not capped by a watertight deck, because that would have interfered with crew and passengers being able to move about the ship, and also it would have interfered with cargo loading.
They didn't want to ruin the design and the experience for the passengers by placing the bulkhead walls all the way up through the decks. That means that at any point, if one compartment floods and it goes above the waterline and above the bulkhead, it can flow into the next compartment.
On the night of April 14, 1912, the bulkheads are put to the test.
Titanic hits the iceberg, it scrapes across the right side of the ship, opens it up, water starts rushing into the front compartments. The watertight doors are shut, but water starts flowing into the other compartments that are not protected by those bulkheads. The squash courts, the mail room, and even the boiler rooms are starting to fill up with water.
There is water pouring in the side of the ship, and Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, goes down and sees all the water coming in.
Because of Andrews' familiarity with the Titanic, he's able to tell from the moment of impact until that moment how much water has come into the ship. He's able to take that water flow rate and calculate how long it will take to fill the 4 bulkheads. And then he notices that it's in watertight compartment number 5 and that the pumps aren't handling it. That's when he comes to the conclusion that the ship is going to founder.
According to survivors, approximately 45 minutes after the collision, Andrews informs the captain that the first 5 compartments are now flooded.
The captain and the designer then proceed down to the engine room to talk to the chief engineer to try to figure out what can be done and what can be saved.
As water flowed into the forward compartments of Titanic that were damaged by the iceberg, this weight of water caused the bow to dip down. And of course, because the bulkheads didn't have a watertight deck on the top, it meant that water spilled over from one bulkhead into the next, rather like an ice cube tray.
The weight of the water is forcing the bow of the ship down, and the ship begins to tilt. Passengers begin to feel it, and as the weight gets heavier and heavier, that angle increases.
Now, the heaviest parts of the ship are the 2 engines in the rear. So you have a large, heavy concentration here due to the engines, but you have a large, heavy concentration here due to the water.
And so basically you have an issue of weight and displacement, and eventually the ship can't fight it anymore.
Some argue that the Titanic would have been better off with no bulkheads at all.
The shipbuilders believed that they had thought of everything when building the Titanic, but they were sadly mistaken.
What they didn't anticipate was that an iceberg collision could scrape along the side of a ship and cause damage in 6 compartments. They were imagining it might be a head-on collision or a puncture.
This design feature ends up being the problem because with all of this water that's seeping into the front, because it's got nowhere else to go, because it's being sealed off, this causes the front of the ship to dip below the waterline and ultimately sink. Had there not been any bulkhead walls there, the dispersion of water might have been much more even because it wasn't going from adjacent compartment to adjacent compartment. It would have taken longer to sink, which meant more people could have been saved. That design was a catastrophe waiting to happen.